How's everyone doing? So, we are continuing our series on worship lessons from the tabernacle. And the tabernacle comes across like a very heavily loaded word, comes a lot with a lot of baggage, both religious and secular alike. If you come from a Catholic background, then the word tabernacle can mean a box in a wall where the communion that's been blessed is stored. Or if you're a secular person, you'll probably think of things like the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark. But the word tabernacle just means dwelling, like how John says the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So when you think of the word tabernacle, think of it like God's house. Now, over the series, we've looked at the gate, the courtyard, and last Sunday, Ranjit took us into God's house. The tabernacle can come across like a very interesting piece of history. It can feel like a museum with signs saying, do not touch over every display. But I would ask you to consider what if this was not what God intended? What if God did not intend it to be a museum filled with do's and don'ts, but He wanted it to be a garden, like the Garden of Eden, where you could experience the Creator God and His presence? Our topic for today is the table of showbread. When we think about food, we think of it very like a very matter of fact thing. Like we go low on energy, we feel hungry, we eat a sandwich, our energy goes up, and we're okay to carry on. But what if there was a meal that transcends time, that could connect our daily mundane lives to the divine? So we will trace this particular meal through the Bible, following the breadcrumbs, pun intended, from Genesis all the way through the New Testament. Now, this starts in one of those places in the Bible where I tend to gloss over a lot, because if I see the word qubit repeated 3 times in a sentence, there's a switch in my brain that just goes off. So I can empathize with you if you feel the same way. But when you start to pay attention and read into this, you realize that there's a lot of beauty and meaning that is poured into these texts. So, to set the playing field, I'll do my thing, which is talk about art. Who didn't see that coming? Waiting for the slides. Okay, cool. All right. So, what does this painting remind you of? Anyone? Yeah, exactly. So, this is a meal at the end of the road to Emmaus, right? And it's by a French painter by the name of Jean-Marie Perrault, or otherwise called Arcabas. I'm so glad that he has a second name, because Jean-Marie Perrault is such a mouthful. Uh, and if you see this painting, you can see that they are not like models or not really fancy people. They just look like everyday working class guys sharing a meal at the end of a busy Friday. They look really interested to whatever the guy in the center is doing. And you'll notice that the artist has drawn very squiggly lines here on top. And it's like as if he's trying to tie the divine or something that cannot be grasped and grounding it to reality with straight lines all around the side. You will notice on the left-hand side, there's a gold leaf hanging off of the table with a cross, something like a cross. And the artist is trying to call us to remember that there is something divine or something that's happening here that is not common, because gold signifies the divine. And then there's a open spot here on the right-hand side, which is forcing your brain to draw up a chair and sit at this table. So we are all invited here to take part of this table. And with this table in focus, I want you to look at the rearview mirror 3,500 years back at another table where God is inviting all of us and telling us that we are part of God's plan. Our scripture readings for today is from Exodus and Leviticus. So starting off with Exodus, the table of showbread, it goes on explaining how the table is made in Exodus chapter 25. Uh, it's basically a table that's slightly above my knee, made of wood and gold. And there are a lot of scholars who try to explain that this table itself represents Jesus in some way, where he is both fully God and fully man, just like the table is both wood and gold. Now, I will sidestep this completely and move directly into Leviticus to focus on the bread. A quick note here is that I will refer to the showbread or refer to it as the bread of the presence, and it means the same thing. All right? So, when we go into Leviticus, speaking of the bread, in chapter 24, it says, take the finest flour and bake 12 loaves of bread using 2/10 of an ephah for each loaf. So just tuck this away into your memory. I will call this up at a later point in the sermon. Now, because I like to bake, I looked up these numbers, and it turns out that this is approximately 3.3 to 3.5 kgs per loaf. So that's like 3 of Jervis's full-size sourdough loaves, all baked into one. That's a really dense bread. And then it is to be arranged in 2 stacks of 6 on each side on the table of pure gold before the Lord. By each stack, put some pure incense as a memorial portion to represent the bread and to be a food offering presented to the Lord. Now, this is something I've completely missed before, but some scholars talk about these sacrifices where they are divided into 2 portions. One is the portion that goes to God, and one is the portion for the humans. Now, it says here that this incense was supposed to represent the bread. So, when the priests ate of the bread, they would burn the incense, and because God is a spiritual being and does not need physical food, the incense was a sweet smelling aroma to God as a part of his portion of the food, right? So when you're fellowshipping and eating the food, the incense was the part of the bread that God ate. Now the bread is to be set out before the Lord regularly, Sabbath after Sabbath, on behalf of the Israelites as a lasting covenant. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, that is all the priests, who are to eat it in the sanctuary area because it is the most holy part of the perpetual share of the food offering presented to the Lord. So they could not take it home, they had to eat it in the temple only. All right. How's everyone doing? Great. So how many of you felt so alien and distant just hearing this? Right? It's like watching a random Marvel superhero movie without understanding the full backstory that is leading into this particular movie. So if you just step into the story right here, it'll seem so completely out of context. So to understand what this entire meal is talking about, we need to understand the first meal in the Bible. And for that, we need to get into Genesis. Now, in Genesis, God creates the humans and keeps them in the garden and invites them to eat a meal, eat of any tree that you want, except for one tree, that is the tree of knowing good and bad. Now, the center of the garden was not a throne, it was not an altar, but it was just the tree of life. And the tree of life was not like the fountain of youth, where if you ate of the tree of life, you suddenly magically became immortal. All right? So the tree of life represented the life-giving power of God. And when the humans partook of that tree, they were sharing with the essence or the presence of God that sustained all life. Now, the tragedy of the entire Genesis story is that the humans felt like God was holding out on them. And so they decided to take the things into their own hands, and they ate of the fruit of knowing good and bad, thus forfeiting their access to the tree of life, forfeiting their access to God, and they were banished out of the garden. With all of this in mind, when we enter the wilderness narrative, we realize that the tabernacle is designed like the Garden of Eden. It's a portable version of the Garden of Eden where God could share his fellowship with the people. Now, when you look at the tabernacle, or once you look at the holy place, you will see that there is a lampstand that looks like a tree. Ranjit explained that last Sunday. It's got almond blossoms as wicks there on top. Then you'll see the curtain that's decorated by uh, cherubim, which are the same class of spiritual beings that guard the, the garden and keep the humans out from accessing the tree. And then there's a table with food presented there as a meal right opposite the lampstand that represents the tree. So this is one way to look at it, that it is a portable Garden of Eden. So every time the priest enters it, there's a mental memory that comes to mind that, okay, I'm entering into the garden, into the presence of God. But apart from the garden, what else do you see here? There's a lampstand. Its light is shining off of every gold surface. And there's a dining table filled with food. It's basically someone's living room. Although today we have living rooms with TVs being the central focus of the living room, it reminds me of this line from Friends where Joey asks, "You don't have a TV? What's all your furniture pointed at?" Right? So today it's very rare that you'll find a living room without a TV, but imagine a time before screens hijacked our lives. The dining table was the center of the living room. I recently was talking to Spurgeon, and he was elaborately explaining how in Nagaland people set up tables and couches in the kitchen so that they can eat food and share and bond with each other right there in the kitchen in the warmth of the fire as well as having food. And it made me think about, it's not unique to Nagaland, but it's a thing that's there in old European houses where you see things like this, where a table is set before a hearth and you share the warmth of the fire as well as a meal. And it's not only common to Europe. In fact, even American houses will have a kitchen tied to the living room. It's not pushed away in the corner somewhere, but right there in the living room. And why is that? Because food and fellowship goes hand in hand. In fact, that's where you get the word companion from. Com in Latin means with, and penne means bread. So companion literally means bread fellow. So after the exile, when the priests entered the tabernacle, they were experiencing that fellowship, that companionship with God, and God was inviting all of us to partake of this meal, to share with Him, and enjoy His presence. Imagine that, like Reba was talking about when she did that song, the God of the universe wants to have this meal with you. Now, you may all wonder, if the bread was so accessible to everyone, why did He make it exclusive that only the priest could eat it and not everyone else? And that's a valid question to ask. So this is where I will ask you to think back to the weight of the showbread that I was talking about, right? I used to wonder when I read the Torah or these portions of the Bible, right? The Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I used to wonder whether the author had OCD because he has this tendency to write all these numbers very meticulously. And I really don't give a damn about these numbers. So why is he pouring so much into it? But then when you start to pay attention, you realize that every word that's listed there is quite intentional. You just have to work at it to understand what it's trying to say. So to understand the weight, you need to go to the nerd section of the Bible, which is the table of weights and measures. So when you go there, you realize that 1 ephah is equal to 10 omers. All right. So in other words, to represent in a different way, 1 omer is 1 by 10 ephah, or 1/10 of an ephah. So therefore, 2/10 of an ephah is 2 omers. So why does this matter, right? What's so special about these numbers? And it gets to the point of the story where you remember that when God was providing for the people in Israel in the wilderness, He provided them manna from heaven. Now, daily we could only, or the people in Israel could only collect 1 omer of manna daily. All right. However, you could not work on the Sabbath. So you had to collect 2 omers, which is 2/10 of an ephah on Friday. So basically, when the priests ate the showbread, it connected him to the manna in the wilderness. It connected him to God's provision in Sabbath. And it was tying the two so that he could recognize that God was his provision in the seasons of wanting. God was his provision in the season of rest. Now, what makes all of this even more interesting is that there's a story in the Gospel of John where right after feeding the 5,000, the people asked Jesus, "What sign will you then give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it was my Father who gave you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Jesus just connected the manna and the bread from heaven to himself. So Jesus is the bread that comes down from heaven. Jesus is the bread that comes right from the Father. And Jesus says that this is the bread for the whole world. It's no longer exclusive to only the Jews or exclusive only to the priests. It belongs to everyone, Jew and Gentile alike. Now, this perfectly takes us to the next place where Jesus makes the connection to the bread, and that is the Last Supper. Now, the upper room is again scattered with so many examples of the tabernacle. Like in the tabernacle, there were these huge loaves of bread, 12 loaves exactly, representing the 12 tribes. Now, the 12 tribes were housed all around the tabernacle, and here in the upper room, the disciples sat around Jesus. And Jesus then, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus takes the bread and he performs this unique liturgy where he takes the bread, blesses or gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it. Four very specific verbs: take, bless, break, and give. These verbs will then become the foundation to Christian worship for the next 2 millennia. So Jesus takes the bread and pours new life and meaning into it. The bread of the old covenant represented God's provision for the nation of Israel. But now, Jesus breaks the bread and says, "This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Then he takes the cup and says, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." He completely reframed the tradition that was thousands of years old. Now, in Leviticus, the showbread was a sign of perpetual covenant and a memorial portion. And Jesus is directly quoting the operational manual of the showbread, but he's reframing it where he is the center of this entire process. So, when you think about it, you think and you realize that Jesus was pointing to himself through all of this. Now, the Greek word remembrance is not like recalling something from the past, just like holding a photo and thinking of something in the past, like a memory, but it is taking the past event and bringing it into the current reality that you have. So it's it's more than just thinking about something that has happened, but actually experiencing it fully. So it's not like a theological lesson that you're experiencing at the table, but a full meal where you're smelling the bread, where you're breaking it, tasting it, feeling it, absorbing it, and letting it sink in. And Jesus was saying that this is me right now, because so far the showbread was a signpost pointing towards God's provision, but Jesus is reframing all of this to point towards him. It's like humanity was carrying this photo of someone they loved really dearly and kept it on a golden table, looked at it with reverence. And here at the upper room, Jesus was slowly taking away the photo from your hand, saying, "You don't need this anymore. I am here with you in your presence." And there's another beautiful connection here that's happening. It's a geographical connection. If you remember, where was Jesus born? And what does Bethlehem mean? The house of bread, right? And the recipe for the showbread says that it needs to be ground with the finest flour. So when the bread was made, it was ground into a finest flour, beaten into a pulp, and then baked in a fiery furnace. And just like the bread, Jesus was ground and beaten. He experienced the blunt force of human evil. He was experiencing the fiery furnace of human affliction on the cross. So it's safe to say that when he was saying that this bread is broken for you, he had all of this in mind. So, right from John 6, where he says, I am the bread of life, to the upper room, where he's pointing to his sacrifice, it's all explaining how God is working through all of this, pointing to the sacrificial reality that the bread that came down from heaven, the bread in the presence of God, is Jesus. But the story of the cross does not end with one man dying there, but it ends further with these two guys who are walking down a road. So these two guys, two disciples of Jesus, one named Cleopas and one who shall not be named, are walking down the road there, and they are really dejected. They feel they have wasted 3.5 years of their lives. They wanted a warrior king like David who could free them of the Romans and unite the kingdom. But somehow he ended up dying on the cross, and they were wondering whether they were following a cult leader. You know, they had given everything for 3 years, and nothing came out of it. And then suddenly a stranger joins them, and he asks them, "What are you talking about?" And they poured their lives out to him, saying that we were expecting all of this, but it didn't happen. And rather than empathizing with them, he actually rebukes them and says that they didn't know what they were talking about. And then he starts connecting the entire Old Testament, right from Genesis, right through the prophets and all the writings of David, explaining how this is all talking about one person. And then right at the end, this whole conversation feels like a walking podcast with someone giving you Bible lessons there. And I just wish I was a flying around there listening to this entire conversation. Would have been so interesting. And right at the end there, when they reach this Emmaus or reach their destination, Jesus pretends like, hey, I got to go on now. I still have further to go. And they're like, no, please come, please come. It's like how you have a very Indian custom where you tell someone no and they don't get it. They're like, no, please come, please stay. And it just goes on, right? No one takes no for an answer. Similarly, Jesus is, okay, I'll come and sit with you. And an interesting thing happens here where the guest suddenly becomes the host at this table. And he takes the bread that is given and he repeats the same 4 verbs, that is, take, bless, break, and give. In that instant, when Jesus blessed the bread, broke it, and gave it, the disciples saw Jesus. And he vanished before their eyes. Think about that line, their eyes were opened. Where else have you heard that line? You heard it in Genesis, in the garden. When they ate of the fruit, their eyes were opened. But the humans saw their own circumstances and failed to see God. Here, however, their eyes were opened, but they saw Jesus, they saw God, and they went blind to their own circumstances. It's a complete reversal of what happened in Genesis. And I always wondered, why did Jesus vanish right here? I mean, it was the best thing to hang out and eat food there, but Jesus vanished. But when you start looking into this, or when I started studying this, I realized that this is what Jesus was talking about. He was saying you didn't need this photo. Or like in the Gospel of John, he says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. And this is exactly what Paul is talking about in 2 Corinthians 5:16, where he says, from now on, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. So here's the secret that the artist, Arkabas, is telling us. Every time we sit with Jesus at this table, the mundane becomes holy. When we partake of the bread and the wine, we are not blindly participating in an ancient ritual. We are called to actively bring to memory the passion of the Christ, his death and resurrection, and celebrating the new covenant with Jesus. I was recently in between jobs. after about 6 months, I got a job offer. It wasn't the best, but I took it because a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. And at the same time, I got another JD which looked perfect, and I really loved it. It looked like it was tailor made for me. And I reached out to them, and for some reason, they never got back to me. I followed up in a week, followed up in a month. It was not happening, and I was becoming anxious. I didn't want the job I currently had, and I was yearning for the idea of this other job. And I kept praying about it, and this moment of waiting, the season of waiting really becomes tough. You're anxious, you're left clueless, wondering what's happening. They're not telling you a clear no. They're saying, we'll get back to you. Nothing's happening. And right out of the blue, suddenly God spoke to me and He said, what was I focusing on? I was considering this idea of the other job. I was yearning for it. I was praying that God make this happen. But I was not actually considering that my focus should be on God and what He's doing for me. Because in the end, I need to realize that He loves me and gave Himself for me. And if He could do that for me, how much more will He freely give me all things? We are all in the same place like the disciples. We are all looking for Jesus with our earthly eyes. But we can only truly see Him when our eyes of faith have been opened and we see Jesus for who He is through faith. Think of it like this. A bottle that has been tightly corked and floating on the ocean, right? The grace of God is lavished upon that bottle like the ocean washes up on that bottle. But if the bottle remains corked, it floats on the ocean without being affected. And if you want the grace of God to fill your hearts, you need to uncork that bottle and let the grace of God flood you. So then the bottle sinks, just like the words from that song, How He Loves Us. If grace is an ocean, then we're all sinking. So if you've been in a season of struggling, praying to God for a new job, praying to God for healing, praying to God in your season of singleness, praying to God for your marriage, praying to God for kids, praying to God and struggling to hold on because your prayers are not getting answered the way you wanted to, then we are invited to sit at this table. We are just like the two disciples expecting Jesus to be the version of hero that we want Him to be. We want Jesus to fit into our story. But Jesus is inviting us to see that we are all part of His story. So we need to open our hearts and let Him speak to us. Let Him show us that we are not alone on the road to Emmaus or a road to nowhere. He is our God. We are in His presence. Now, we will be getting into communion in some time, and when you take the bread, you need to realize that this communion is an invitation to the wedding reception in the book of Revelation. So if your prayers feel unanswered and if you're wondering where is Jesus, you need to look for Jesus in all of this, because Jesus is the answer to all your prayers. Jesus is the bread of life, and whoever comes to Him will never go hungry. Whoever believes in Him will never be thirsty. The story of Emmaus ends with the two disciples running to tell their friends that they have seen the risen Jesus. And as we eat the communion bread and drink the juice, I want you now to take a few moments to consider the Last Supper and Jesus being broken for you and me. Ask yourself, what is keeping me blind from seeing Jesus right now at this table? Is it cynicism? Is it skepticism? Is it fear? Is it an unanswered prayer or a prayer that is not getting answered specifically the way I want it? The grace and love of God is freely being poured out on all of us. If we want to sink into His grace, like the open bottle on the ocean, then we need to pray and surrender our hearts to Him and take away that thing that is blocking our hearts from receiving Him. Now, none of this is possible without the Holy Spirit. It is the Holy Spirit who convicts us of our blindness, and it is through the Holy Spirit that we share in this meal with God. So, as we leave the church today, think about the disciples at Emmaus. They didn't run back to Jerusalem because Jesus commanded them to. It was not a law, it was not something that Jesus told them, go and do it. They ran back because their hearts were ablaze. It was burning within them. And they wanted to tell everyone about Jesus. So, what is the Holy Spirit motivating me to do right now? Now that I have seen the face of Jesus with unveiled eyes, is my heart ablaze? Who is the one friend that I know who's walking alone on the road to Emmaus, who I can go and share the invitation of Jesus to sit at the table with him? I want to leave this up there on the screen for you to ponder as Ranjit comes up and takes us through the communion. But think about all of this, that we are invited to share at this table with Jesus. That this is not a ritual that was thousands of years old, that's being repeated without a meaning, but it is an active participation with God through all of Jesus and what he has done for us.